welcome to the Scroll Sanity podcast. I'm Nick DeBella.
And I'm Carmela Guille.
And we are going to jump right into this episode of the Scroll Sanity podcast because we have a lot to chat about this week. First and foremost, I wanted us to follow up on our Flows and Frictions segment. This moment brought to you by my dumb phone. And Carmela, if it's all right with you, I'm going to go first because as I said to you before we jumped on, I just got back from vacation. My wife and my daughter and I went to Florida for a couple of weeks to see family. And on that trip, it was my first time traveling without a smartphone. So I know you just went through that a few weeks ago. And so it was my turn. And two things really stood out to me. The first was what I would consider a flow for me. It was really more of an observation, but sitting in the airport without a smartphone for the first time was very eye-opening. You know, just waiting by the gate, I think 80 to 90% of the people in front of me were on their smartphones, right? They were just sitting and scrolling. And this woman who was sitting next to me, and this is just an observation, it's not a judgment, it just was a feeling I had in the moment. She was scrolling TikTok for probably the full 45 minutes we were waiting for the flight to board. And I mean, when I say straight 45 minutes, I mean, she did not move, did not look up, did not do anything but scroll through TikTok. And I just had this really visceral, really unpleasant reaction to seeing it. It felt very, very addiction-y to me. It just felt like someone who was not really in their body and wasn't even really engaging with what they were doing. And again, not a judgment. Hey, I switched to a light phone because I was one of those people. So I put myself very much in that camp. But in that same moment, I felt a tremendous amount of gratitude that I was able to just kind of look up around the world around me. And the airport's not much to look at, but, you know, it allowed me to be, I think, a better dad, a better partner to my wife, and, you know, just have a few moments in my body waiting for the flight to board.
Great people watching.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's the best because it's people from all over the world. There was a beach volleyball team who was coming back from
Nice.
a competition and stuff. So yeah, it was cool. The other, so I'm going to cheat and have two this week, was very much a friction. I went to Target to make a return. And apparently the order was purchased via mobile. So via this Target Insider app or whatever it's called. And I went to the store to make the return and they would not take my return without a smartphone. And
wow.
The woman said, I just need your app. I just need to use the app. I said, I don't have a smartphone. And her direct quote was, what do you mean you don't have a smartphone? And so I took out my light phone and I showed it to her. Carmela, she rolled her eyes at me. She was like, well, I can't help you. So I literally could not, I had to leave.
Wow.
I had to leave. I said, all right, I guess I'll have to call my wife or bring her back or something. So it was, it was frustrating. It's just one of these things that it's such an assumption in this world that we live in now. And even a couple of the restaurants we went to while we were out still had the scan the QR code. And thank God my wife still has her phone because sometimes it's a lifeline.
Right.
But yeah, definitely some ups and downs over the last couple of weeks. How about you? Any moments brought to you by your dumb phone?
Yeah, I've also had to make some returns recently and, you know, just printing out QR codes and going to the UPS store or whatever. It hasn't been like too much of a friction, but it is just, you know, something to remember and be intentional about. But, you know, it's pretty amazing how quickly like we can make these changes and just it hasn't been too difficult. And then I think the other one that I wanted to mention is I missed a video call from my best friend and her son because they called me via WhatsApp and I didn't have my smartphone with me. And so later I saw that I had missed their call and she said, oh, you know, Lulu just wanted to talk to you or wanted to see you. And I was like, oh, bummer. But, you know, the truth is that when they called, I was working at the library. And so in my smartphone life, I probably would have stopped what I was doing and like stopped my flow to take the call. And without the smartphone, I don't have to make that difficult choice. Like I don't have the temptation of saying, oh, I'm working, but they're calling. What do I do? Like, it's just like, it's just not a choice that I have to make in that moment. And I'm grateful for that I just, you know, was able to be at the library doing the work that I wanted to be doing. And then I can call them later or whatever.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting, you know, coming back from this first vacation without a smartphone, I have to say, I feel like I enjoyed it much more than I have the past vacations. Cause I think at least for me, vacation was a really good excuse to just dive into the smartphone. Right. And so I didn't have one. And I had a couple of people reach out to me on that vacation and say, You're really hard to get a hold of. And it honestly, I almost took it as a badge of honor because it meant I wasn't immediately jumping into everything everyone was sending my way. And I think that's a perfect segue into what is kind of an interesting new concept for us this
Yeah,
episode. I'd love for you to introduce this reader's journey. Tell us a little bit about Alex, who
yeah.
you've been speaking with, and then we're going to jump in and tell everybody, all of our listeners, about Alex, who's a listener and a subscriber to the Substack Scroll Sanity newsletter, about her journey moving from an iPhone to a light phone.
Yeah, so Alex and I connected on Substack, and she's a paid subscriber and a mother of two littles. And she's been keeping us updated about her switch from an iPhone to a dumb phone. And she also chose a light phone. And so I just wanted to share a bit about her experience as she made this transition. And because it resonated so much with, I think, things that I felt and that we've talked about. So I'll be reading or we'll be reading different quotes from her, and then we can, comment on them. But this is what she wrote about why it was time to make the switch. She said, I feel my screen time has left me less patient, having less time for what is important to me, and not loving this false sense of urgency that I have to reply, order, research everything so quickly. I want to take back my time, discover new hobbies, and fill my time with purpose. I want to look at the world and laugh with my children instead of taking pictures every 2 seconds when they do something adorable. I feel like the paparazzi sometimes.
I can really relate to that one.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, she's touching on so many things that we've talked about, and just like this desire of wanting to reconnect with the world around us, with the people around us. And I thought she put it just like really beautifully.
Yeah, Alex, I am you. I feel so reading that quote. I just feel so connected to people who are going through this. And what I think is so resounding in this is feeling less patient, feeling like she has less time when these devices are sold to us with it's a completely inverse relationship of how they market it. It's going to make
Yeah.
things so much more convenient. You'll have more time for the things that are important to you. But the reality is they're designed to steal your attention, and they
Right.
do it really, really well. And I think it sounds like Alex was really, really experiencing that in her own life, especially with, I've got one kid. I know you have two kids, so we can certainly both relate from the parenting lens. In this quote from Alex, she says, I left my smartphone at home yesterday because I couldn't find it and had to dash to my daughter's dance class. I was amazed by how calm the drive to dance felt and how much less anxiety I felt not seeing my arrival time on the big navigational screen, where I inevitably arrive with less than 5 minutes to spare. And that, to me, especially because I was doing so much driving through the state of Florida over the last
Mhm.
few weeks without a smartphone, I did feel less anxiety, right? Because there's you're almost trying to beat the clock that's on the GPS and the time it
Yes.
takes to get somewhere. So I can certainly relate to that one.
Yeah, I have written about this on the Scroll Sanity Substack, and I called it like, taking back the wheel, because there is something about being present at the wheel when you don't have that GPS like glaring at you and with that countdown and the time. And so just allowing yourself to be in the moment. I always felt like I was in the future when I was driving somewhere. And something that Alex and I also like talked about was getting to know our city, because we both
Mhm.
have moved to like new places, and having the GPS has meant that we don't have to know even like the major highways around us. Or, I was going to my son's swimming classes like 4 times a week, and I still couldn't get there without a smartphone. And I had to, push myself to figure it out and remember. And, not having the GPS made me just like, has made me more aware of my surroundings and of the roads around me, and just like how do they work. And, so that has given me also a better like sense of place.
Absolutely. And Alex also mentioned, to your point, I want to learn my way around my new city without the GPS and stop playing DJ to my kids in the car. And I loved that one because the Frozen soundtrack has become my life in the last few months. And I think there's something to be said for how much we're contending with behind the wheel without
Yes.
a essentially a computer in front of you, right?
Yes.
And these phones are so powerful now that they can do so many things. And if you're behind the wheel and you don't have a co-pilot, another parent or another adult who can help
Yes.
man some of these things, then really the expectation is for you to operate a motor vehicle and be a DJ and be a navigator. And it's the
Right.
danger goes up and up and up, and you've got children in the car. And I mean, every
Yeah.
life is precious, but it just speaks to it's become a new normal for us when really it's actually kind of dangerous. And it sets an expectation for kids, right? That always on demand, everything's at your
Yes.
fingertips. What are we teaching them at that age?
That was a big part of why I wanted to make the switch because I did feel like my smartphone was making me an unsafe driver, to
Mm,
be honest. And I also was afraid of how my children were gonna react because they were so used to always having what they wanted, what song they wanted, and you know what? They didn't skip a beat. Like,
wow.
I just turned on the radio and, like, they were just I don't know. I mean, they really didn't skip a beat, and then eventually they would say like, "Oh, well, I want the fire truck song," and I'd be like, "Sorry, I don't have that right now."
Right.
And we can listen to that at home. And they're like, "Okay." And they're just like looking out the window and like I'll pass them books. Like I have books with me on the passenger seat and I'll pass them a book. And like I was really surprised to be honest, because they had been so used to like having me as their personal DJ and they just like rolled with it and they listened to the radio and it's fine.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. On the flight back from Florida just yesterday, actually, we don't. Our daughter Thea doesn't do screen time. We just, she's less than 2. It's just kind of our unless it's FaceTime. I think I mentioned on a past episode, we don't really do it unless she's talking to other family members, that kind of thing. And right across the aisle from us was a child who I think was they mentioned was 16 months, so they're right around the same age, and that baby was on a smartphone almost the entire flight. And again, I don't judge. Whatever you got to do to pacify your children to get through the day, right? It is what a lot of parents have to do. But we read books the entire flight, and that child was playing games and playing loud music and playing videos on a smartphone, dad's smartphone, it seemed like, for the whole flight. And it was a little disruptive, and that child had quite a few tantrums. And it's a correlation, certainly not causation, but it just speaks to the earlier we put these things in children's hands, the earlier they adapt to the idea that it's always there. And so I think, to your point around earlier around being mindful, I think we can teach mindfulness at a very early age. It doesn't have to be something we correct for later in life. So
Right. Well, and I'll just make one point also, like, the biggest tantrums I've ever seen my children have always involved screens.
wow.
This is why we don't really do screens either, but when or if we do, it's like taking them away will always result in, like, a massive tantrum, and I'm like, "This is why this is part of why we don't do this." But another person that I connected with on Substack was writing about the fear that she had about these smartphone apps that she relies on every day, like can I get to the airport without using Lyft? Or how do I check the subway delays when I'm out and about? How can I share my location with someone? And this is from the Dumb Phone Diaries on Inkwells and Robots on Substack. And she writes, valid questions, of course, but so were these. When was the last time I discovered a place on my own instead of looking something up on Google? Could I rely on my memory to navigate a city I had lived in for almost a decade? Isn't being entirely dependent on maps a safety risk? Was I incapable of waiting in line or at a doctor's office without scrolling through my phone? When was the last time I confronted boredom without running away from it? But I do think that this is bringing up these really good points about the apps, certain apps that we use that are really important to our daily life. And I think it's often a something that holds people back from making the switch.
Yeah, and I think it depends on where you live, your lifestyle, what your needs are too. And I think, we had that interview with Jose Briones on a past episode, and he mentioned very much that it really does matter. The circumstances matter when you're making this type of decision. I think if you're a person who uses ride sharing regularly, I don't have a good answer. I don't know if you can live without a smartphone right now because some of them allow you to work from the web. You can book it on your computer, but then if you head down from your office and you're standing on the street looking for the car, you don't have any way to track which one is the right one. And so, yeah, I think that makes it really, really difficult. This idea of navigating the city you've lived in for a decade, as you mentioned from the Inkwells and Robots on Substack, I've lived in my city for almost a decade now. And the first 6 years or 7 years of that were with a smartphone. And now that I'm without it, I surprise myself sometimes getting a little lost around here. And it's a little embarrassing, frankly, but it's also nice because I'm starting to do it by landmarks, right? Oh, at that statue, I take a left. And it feels a
Yeah.
little more like, no matter what, I can get where I'm going. And I think that feeling less reliant on it feels kind of empowering.
Mhm.
And to that point, I thought we could jump back into some of what Alex shared with you in your conversation with her as a paid subscriber on Substack. It says here, day 3 with the light phone. Overall, I feel more intentional and a sense of relief not being connected to my phone all of the time. I uploaded my podcast and audiobook and used the GPS yesterday, and it worked seamlessly. I also love the voice to text option. I made a list this morning of tasks I will need to complete for my computer later in the day, place a target order, answer emails, etc. But all of these things can wait until I have time to sit down and dedicate my full attention to the task. I'm not going to try to sneak them in while making lunch for my toddler, or walking my dog, looking at my phone, or cheering on my oldest on her scooter. I feel lighter already not multitasking. Right now, it is only the camera I'm missing, but hopefully I'll adjust. I mean, we both only switched not too long ago, and I think I can really relate to those first couple days, and there's definitely a level of excitement, but you also do recognize some of the things you're missing, like a camera.
Yeah, totally. Something I think that she's touching on here that is super important is this idea of making to-do lists for your digital tasks. And I kind of think of it as when we run errands, we tend to put them together in a way that makes sense. So we'll say, okay, I'm going to go to the post office and that's next to the Target and it's next to the grocery store and we'll kind of clump those things together and it's more efficient that way. But with our digital errands, we tend to just scatter them throughout our whole life. And then they're taking up little bits of time everywhere and just sort of distracting us from our present moment. And so, this I think is a really important thing that Alex is talking about, which is running digital errands can also be something that we cluster together, sit down, do with intention, and we don't have to scatter them throughout our day.
Yeah, and I think the other concerning thing when it comes to digital errands is, again, all of those platforms are designed to be as frictionless as possible, right? The buy now buttons, the one click ordering, these things that are designed to, frankly, make you spend more money than you meant to. And so I think versus going to a store, waiting in line, using, the self checkout or whatever the case may be, it's digital errands, I think, probably come with even a greater cost, not only mentally, but probably financially as well. Alex mentions in this most recent quote about missing the camera. One thing I did want to suggest as a recovering gadget addict myself is, once I got rid of my iPhone, I did make a purchase of a digital camera. It's called the Sony ZV-1, and it's it fits in my pocket, little portable camera. It has a flip out screen so you can take really good selfies, or adjust the angle for something interesting, and it uses the same charger as the light phone, so I can literally carry my phone and my camera and keep them both juiced up as needed.
Nice.
And I brought that camera with me on vacation, and I take as many photos as I would have had I had my iPhone? Absolutely not. But as we talked about on a previous episode, I don't really mind that because I took intentional photos as opposed to 8 million photos.
Right.
And so, again, I think there's a lot of value with that. So the Sony ZV-1 is definitely a recommendation for me. I know Jose made some great recommendations on a past episode for us as well. The world of digital cameras, the prices have plummeted since the smartphone came out, right? Because the need for them has come down so much. So I would say
Mhm.
to anyone who's looking at dumb phones or has a dumb phone, I'd encourage you to look into the digital camera market, the kind of point and
Mhm.
shoot cameras, because they're pennies on the dollar from what they were even 5 years ago.
And how's the quality?
It's great. Yeah. So it shoots 4K video. It shoots really high megapixel photos. It works better in low light, I think, than the iPhone as well. And it's got a really long battery too.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna look into that. I like that idea. Thanks, Nick.
So let's talk a little bit about the idea of digital addiction with a dumb phone, because I think, having a dumb phone is not a cure all. And I know you have thoughts on this, Carmela.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, like switching to a dumb phone has been wonderful in so many ways, but I think it's also brought to light the fact that I still have a lot of work to do when it comes to my digital addiction. And
Mm,
this is something that Jose mentions in his newsletter about his digital habits after switching to a dumb phone. I'm noticing them myself. Like I'm using my laptop a lot more.
mm.
And so I'm wondering, like, how has your relationship to other digital devices changed after switching to a dumb phone?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I mentioned on our first episode, my current kind of everyday carry is my light phone, that Sony ZV camera, and my iPad. So I have the iPad Air, and that has the keyboard case. So it really acts as my laptop. And I would say my iPad usage is definitely up, but it has a screen time counter like the iPhone did. So I think when I checked it over vacation, it was like 2 hours a day versus, I think when we started the podcast, I was at 8 hours and 45 minutes a day. So
Yeah.
a massive drop. But I think less than the usage is the intentionalism. Digital intentionalism is definitely my mindset these days. While the usage of the iPad is up, it is almost entirely for things like video essays and lectures on film theory and science, like the things I'm interested in. And I said to my wife recently, God, I love film. And I lost that part of myself over the last few years. And I mean, yes,
Mhm.
I have a full-time job, we have a baby, but much like starting this podcast, getting rid of that phone opened up so many hours for me to again go back to things that I love. And going back to the TikTok woman in the airport, she wasn't meaningfully engaging with the content. I was watching, she was scrolling every 3 seconds. She wasn't even finishing her
Right.
video clips. And so, maybe she felt she was getting something out of that. I can't speak for her. But for me, if I am watching in some cases, a 90-minute video about film theory or the engineering of solar power, that's more meaningful to me because it's something I want to get better educated on, and it's long form and it's intentional. And so my
And
usage
you're
is
not scrolling in the middle of it.
right. And I guess, what's interesting is I could very easily do that with the iPad because I could have Instagram on there. I could use
Yeah.
some of the other social media tools, but I almost don't even think to do it. And the other thing is the form factor, right? The iPad's kind of clunky. Like you can't take it with you to the kitchen or the bathroom or down the hall.
Right.
It's kind of clunky, and I keep it in the case with the keyboard on it, so it's like a laptop. And so
Mhm.
I use it as like a media consumption device, and that consumption is not short form, and it's not
Mhm.
brought to me by an algorithm. It's very much more by my own research. So I think that's been interesting for me. For you with using the laptop more, is it productivity? Is it trying to squeeze some of the old iPhone things into it, or how are you finding yourself using it?
Well, I would say mainly it's because of WhatsApp, because I have the WhatsApp app on
Mhm.
my laptop, and I still do use WhatsApp for, like, all of my group chats, and while most of my group chats are with people that don't live in my area, some of them are with neighbors and friends that I see pretty regularly. So I'm often like making plans with people. So that's something I'm still like highly addicted to WhatsApp, I think is the thing. Let's be honest. And so there's that. And then I'm also using my laptop now to do things that I used to do with my smartphone, which is like listen to a podcast while I'm cooking,
Mm,
which is fine, but I am like taking it with me into the kitchen. But I do feel like when I'm home, I still have the impulse to be online,
mm,
and something that I used to not have Wi-Fi at home when I was single, and now I'm married to a tech guy, and we definitely have Wi-Fi at home, and something that he has offered is, like, he can turn my Wi-Fi off at a certain time, and I've been like, "Well, you know, but, because I'm, like, in Zoom calls or different things but I'm like, "You know what? I really do need." I think because I have the Freedom app that I set for, like, 9 p.m., so I'm still working out. I think I do need a shut off time for the internet.
well, it's interesting that like you said, the impulse to just be connected. It's whether it's for social media or otherwise, just being on it is an impulse I think we all have. And I will say, admittedly, that iPad usage that I just said was much more intentional. That's the case by and large. And I think you mentioned this on our interview with Jose Briones, that your usage was kind of slipping on vacation a little bit as well. I did find myself like I had the iPad next to my bed one night and I was like, oh, I'm using this in bed. Gross. And I kind of had to
Right.
stop myself. I caught myself doing it, but boy, it's a slippery slope. It really, really
Yeah.
is.
It totally.
Did want to mention that the light phone, which Alex is using, you're using, and I'm using, that does have a podcast functionality that I swear by. I use it I use it on my way in this morning, listening to podcasts. I was a big podcast person on my iPhone as well, so that's been a really, really nice way to stay connected to the things I like that again are long form and are intentional.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great. So Alex is saying here, we have another quote from her 1 month in, and she writes, "Since starting my dumb phone journey, I'm finding a new sense of peace in my life and I'm becoming a more patient parent." And I just like, I'm
Right.
like, this is why, we do this. This is why I do the work that I do. And I wanted to mention a piece that I recently had published in Business Insider, which is called "I Traded My iPhone for a Dumb Phone. It's Made Me a Better Mother and Person." And we'll link to that in the show notes. But I definitely, don't want to say like, "It solved all of my problems and I have I'm just the best mother in the world and everything." No, like, but it definitely has made me more present with my children. And so go ahead and check that out and give it a read if you're interested.
It's so interesting for me because I'm new to the parenting journey and I'm new to the dumb phone journey, and I'm grateful for switching when I did. And I saw my dad over our vacation, and he saw my little phone for the first time, and he was laughing because I'm his son. He's known me to be I was a gadget addict at 12, right? I had a stereo,
Right.
I had everything you can imagine because I love that stuff. And he's like, "Who are you now? What is that little thing you're holding?" And I just said, "Dad, I couldn't even imagine being a parent and still having one of those. I just couldn't. I literally don't think I could do it, and I certainly don't think I could do it well." So,
Yeah.
to Alex's point and to your piece in Business Insider, everyone should make their own choices. But for me, and it sounds like for you and for Alex, getting rid of this smartphone has only made parenting
Yeah.
a more fruitful experience.
And I also wanna point out, like, because 'cause I've had conversations with other parents who are like, "But I need email or whatever." And, like, yes, all of our needs are different. And there's also a dumb phone for all of your different needs. And, there might be a dumb phone out there that meets those needs that would just have a little bit more friction than the iPhone. And so it's something to consider.
Absolutely. You mentioned Alex checking in with us 1 month into her journey, and a lot of benefits, but it sounds like she's having some frictions as well. Her quote here says, "I'm still frustrated by the friction of this tiny device from time to time. I was 20 minutes late for my daughter's 30-minute swim lesson while trying to use the light phone GPS. But since then, I've learned my way and no longer need the GPS, but use my iPhone offline maps when I need to go to a new place. I am loving learning how to actually get around my new city," which obviously we talked a little bit already about the idea of navigating without a smartphone. But I've had a couple of stresses myself where I've been trying to get somewhere important that's time sensitive. And the power of a smartphone's having real time global positioning system built right in can't be understated in those moments. But I think in the long term, yes, in the immediate it can be stressful, but I think in the long term there's a tremendous amount of value in using your mind to be that resource as opposed to the technology in your hand. It shouldn't be in your hand while you're driving.
Yes, and I will say there is a hack that I've been using, which is that I had to do a lot of driving this week and to places in this area that are very rural, and I don't know my way around like the back country roads. And before I left the house, I turned on my iPhone and I put in my destination on my iPhone in the GPS, and then it got me there. So I used the iPhone to get me there. And then once I was there, I guess the maps were, like, cached, and so
Mm,
I was able to then search a different place, and it got me there, and this is all, like, without being,
connected.
online connected. So I was like, "This is great," like, because I could have done that with the light phone as well because the GPS does work really well, but it's not, like, a great like, when for a long drive and for it's just a little bit clunky. It's hard for me to, like, see it when I'm driving because it is so small, and that's something that worked for me on this one, like, trip that I had, but it's not, the way that I'm normally getting around.
Yeah, and I think there's the smartphone user interface and user experience has been designed to be easily readable and understandable at a glance, certainly when you're driving. And I think the limitation that any e-ink screen like the light phone is going to have is that it's black and white. It's I think an inch by 2 inches.
Yeah.
So glancing at it, nothing stands out, right? There's no high contrast, there's no color. It's really difficult to look at it and take meaningful information away from it at a short glance. I've noticed that while driving for sure.
And I think even just, like, being able to set it up in a way in the car that's easy to see, like, that's been a challenge for me because I, like, put it in the cup holder or something, which is not
Right, it's two
very
feet below the windshield.
yeah, and so I'm like, "Okay, I think if I could, like, find a better way to see it, that would make it easier," but I haven't yet put a lot of energy into doing that. So, I think one of the last things that we wanted to touch on that Alex touched on says she writes, "I think one of the most valuable aspects of this experience has been my relationship to time. Before, I was checking my iPhone constantly to look at the time and the days felt slow and boring. I wonder now if because I'm observing so much more in my day to day that I have more interest in the present moment. I also purchased a Casio watch and I'm working to check that instead of the phone." This I think is just a super easy hack to minimize screen time is to get a wristwatch. If
Mhm.
you don't wanna get a dumb phone, at least get a wristwatch because the whole, looking at your phone for the time, you fall into the rabbit hole, right? You wanted to look at the time, and next thing you know, you're like scrolling somewhere or buying something or whatever.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. I actually collect watches, and that sounds hoity-toity. I don't think I have a single watch worth more than $200, so it's not like they're Rolexes or anything. But I really like the design of them, and I like the engineering of them, and so I have a little watch box at home, and I like to pick one out in the morning. So it's something that you can almost find a new hobby, a new way to style yourself, a new way to
Right.
engage in something. And the other cool thing is there's some really awesome small watch shops, even in the U.S. Like I've supported some small local artisans who make watches. And
Nice.
so it's a nice way to, as you said, stay up to date on time because I am a very punctual person. I like to know where I'm going
Yeah.
and getting there on time. And the other thing is some watches have features that certainly aren't as powerful as a smartphone, but some will have compasses built in. Some will
Oh my
have
gosh,
timers built
yes.
in. So, there's ways to replace some of those kind of instant tools that we used to have on the smartphone with a wristwatch. I highly recommend that.
I side note, I remember back in the day when my dad had I forget what kind of watch it was, but I mean, it was a mini computer. He
Right.
had phone numbers in there. He had all the different time settings for different cities in the world. He had alarm clocks. Like it was pretty cool.
Yeah, and that was in the past. So imagine what you can get
Yeah,
on there now. And
exactly.
I have seen some folks in the dumb phone community saying, you can get an Apple Watch with cellular connectivity, which allows you to have iMessage, which I know is important for folks. It has turn by turn directions. You can take phone calls and that kind of thing. And I think that's a pretty interesting option for folks. It does require you to have an iPhone. You can't just get it out of the
Mhm.
box. It does require an iPhone to set up, which I don't necessarily agree with, but I'll take that up with Apple, I guess. For folks who do want to still be tethered to maybe the smartphone world, I think that's a decent option as well. All right, Carmela, we have one last quote from our subscriber, Alex, who shared so much about her experience moving from the iPhone to the light phone.
So Alex is talking about how different her evenings feel. She feels like she has more time and she's feeling more fulfilled.
Mm.
And she says there isn't the same level of indecision that I faced previously. Moments aren't stolen by scrolling. I used to want to stay up late to do all the things that I didn't do during the day, but now I feel content and ready for bed. I totally can relate to that. And Alex says that to fill this evening time, I've always been an avid reader, so I'm spending more time reading and I've started watercoloring. I'm a complete beginner, but I'm enjoying it. My daughter feels special when I have a new picture to give her at breakfast in the morning. So I think that's lovely.
I mean, that just warms the heart for me. I think if anyone can replace doom scrolling or digital errands or whatever you want to call it with watercolors that you give to your daughter as a gift every morning. I mean, my God,
Yeah.
what else do you need to hear? I think that's such a powerful thing because that's, whether they keep every drawing or every painting or not, that's something her daughter's going to remember for the rest of her life. And, I don't think Alex will remember the last thing she scrolled or the last thing she bought online on her phone. It has such a huge impact on those around us when we make switches like this.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's just moving away from this pretending to be productive online and just doing something for the sake of doing it, not because it's productive or just because it's fun and just because it brings you joy. I want to do more of that myself.
Absolutely. And I can definitely empathize with Alex's journey and certainly having that free time. Like we started a podcast, she started watercoloring and I think that speaks volumes to how much time was going down the rabbit hole, as it were. Well, I want to thank Alex Lyons, our subscriber, for engaging with us at Thrill Sanity and for sharing so much of her experience as she moves from the iPhone to the light phone. Carmela, you mentioned your most recent publication. Where can listeners find that most recent story you had published?
Yeah, sure. So check it out on Business Insider. And then all of my links are also on the Scroll Sanity Substack newsletter where you can subscribe and feel free to become a paid subscriber as well.
And if anybody's looking for those links or links to where they can subscribe to the podcast, you can find us on Instagram at Scroll Sanity. And our link in bio has all of that information in there as well. We will be back in just a few weeks with a brand new episode. So be sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Thanks again, Carmela.
Thanks, Nick. Take care, everyone.